that those are major nuclear powers. Those are not like a little bit. And they were angry. And the next phase was probably, did you see where it was tit for tat. And it was getting deeper and more missiles. Everyone was stronger, to a point where the next one's going to be, you know what, the N-word. You know what the N-word is, right?
Nuclear.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
I figured you'd want to clean that up.
Founded in the aftermath of World War II, the United Nations was built to navigate international issues like famine, genocide, human rights, war, and disease, as well as to maintain a rules-based international order.
People who had seen war twice in their lifetime were determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This new building was dedicated for that task, a permanent headquarters for the United Nations, the world's workshop for peace.
Instead, the UN has come to have a reputation as an institution with limited or irrelevant powers. Its ability to enforce international law and assert the authority it has been granted has continually been hampered by the specific national interests of some of its most powerful member states.
A familiar sight in the UN Security Council. Yet another veto by a permanent member, meaning the resolution under discussion will not be passed and the UN as a whole will be unable to act.
A new approach is needed, grounded in international law, including the enforcement of this Council's resolutions.
I believe we have reached a point where the United Nations mission is all but dead. In the last 4 decades, one nation stands above the rest in its use of the veto power, which allows just one permanent member of the UN to remove resolutions from the floor.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/1997/199 please raise their hand? Thank you. Those against? Thank you. Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 14 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 0 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted
owing to the negative vote of a permanent member.
That nation was also the only nation to ever use nuclear weapons in wartime. The United States, which uses the UN veto power to deny self-determination on a case-by-case basis, hypocritically denounces nuclear proliferation while holding the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, vehemently defends the actions of its greatest ally Israel while never holding that state accountable, and deploys its Central Intelligence Agency to reshape politics in other nations. This nation uses its primacy on the world stage to deflect scrutiny of its actions and the actions of its allies, and to maintain the centrality of its economic interests in world affairs. The U.S. has repeatedly sent its ambassadors to the United Nations to deny the Palestinian people their right to self-determination, while also asserting the right of Israel to exist ad nauseum.
But today, Israel continues its war on Gaza with no UN intervention, and resolutions coming before the Security Council are vetoed by the United States, just as it has vetoed the vast majority of prior resolutions sanctioning Israel for its illegal occupation of Palestinian territory. The US wants to enlarge the Security Council, but it will not budge on its refusal to give up the veto while criticizing Russia for using it.
The message is clear. Israel's rights to exist supersede the rights of anyone who might physically occupy a space referred to by the most ardent Zionists as Greater Israel.
Do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?
Israel does exist. Israel is a recognized member of the United Nations. Besides this, there is not such a thing in international law like a right of a state to exist. What is enshrined in international law is the right of a people to exist.
Palestinians are described like insects or pests that cannot be reasoned with, hell-bent on the destruction of Israeli society.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
Anyone who decries or resists this paradigm is accused of anti-Semitism, thus completely negating any claim to self-determination in the face of a decades-long occupation. To be sure, there are extreme organizations calling for the liquidation of either side, like Hamas or Beitar, but this is not unique to either of these societies, and the power dynamic at play is clear. None of Israel's enemies or combatants have shown a significant ability to thwart Israeli attacks or to respond in kind. Israeli weapons have, in a matter of a few years, reduced Gaza to rubble and set back Iran and its proxy forces years behind by destroying many of their munitions in the latest war. Day after day, more Palestinian people are displaced, die of starvation, are shot in breadlines, or live in hunger and desperation. This, despite one of the official tenets of the IDF being that harm to non-combatants is to be avoided at all costs, to maintain the moral integrity of their military.
The IDF, which I tell you, you cannot agree, that's okay, but I tell you, IDF is the most moral army in the world. I repeat, it's the most moral army in the world.
Well, that brings
it's not shooting.
Okay.
It's not, one second, one more sentence, Mr. Morgan, please.
Okay.
It's not shooting at population. Is not shooting an innocent population. But you tell me, what do we need to do when Hamas terrorists are hiding behind human people, are hiding behind schools?
You know the first thing you could do? You could lift the ban that the Israeli government has put on international journalists going into Gaza, so that all the claims that you make, which always blame Hamas for absolutely everything, could be verified by independent journalists. Why don't you do that? Why for 20 months have you banned international media from going into Gaza? An unprecedented ban.
Well, I want to tell you that, first of all, you have to understand something. The IDF army is not trained to shoot in bursts. They are trained to shoot through sights in a single shot mode. That means they are not shooting like in the movies, like you think, spraying all over.
What's that got to do with the media being banned?
There is no reason the political goals of any group, even ones like Hamas, which have seen no contested election since 2006, should give carte blanche to Israeli officials to engage in eliminationist rhetoric and activity. In every case, the United States has sent Israel these weapons, aircraft, and vehicles to accomplish these goals. Diplomats on both sides of this alliance say that these arrangements are crucial to the survival of both nations. The creation of the State of Israel itself, with the help of the UN, also immediately undermined any role of an international mediator and the concept of self-determination. People of the Jewish diaspora were regarded as a people without a state, and their biblical homeland was thought of in this Zionist framework as a land without its people. However, people were already living in what was called Palestine in the 20th century. Palestinians did not have a state because Great Britain destroyed the Ottoman Empire and replaced them with their own colonial rule. Moving from one empire to another, Jewish settlers began to arrive there even before the end of World War II. The ensuing displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, known as the Nakba, culminated with the formation of Israel as a nation. I am not going to claim to have a better option in hindsight, and I do know that many nations turned Jews away or discouraged them from coming to their country. Even after the horrors of the Holocaust, state-condoned and sponsored anti-Semitism continued, and that cannot be denied when talking about the foundations of modern Israel.
A Fortune magazine poll found that only 1 in 10 respondents favored increasing quotas or making exemptions for refugees, and 4 out of 10 believed Jews had too much power in the United States. It further found that 85% of American Protestants and 84% of Catholics opposed offering sanctuary to European refugees. So did more than a quarter of Jewish Americans.
But I also know that the concept of self-determination was not formulated to give some people the right to take it away from others. The expansion of Israel unfolded in similar ways to the United States expansion, with campaigns of terror and resistance clashing across rapidly changing boundaries.
We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased.
So I think using October 7th, 2023 as a starting point for this conflict would paint an incomplete picture of what's going on. Much like the United States bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Nakba has been all but forgiven and forgotten in the post-World War II West-centric order in which we live. How did we get here?
a short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet.
Scene 2144A.
Sir, at the time that you first found out about the atomic bomb, did you regard it as a curse or a blessing to mankind?
Well, I thought it was a blessing. I thought it could be used and made a blessing. I never worried about its being a curse. I wanted a weapon that would win the war, and it did. That's what I was interested in. After we made a demonstration of it in Texas, in New Mexico, when the first one was exploded in New Mexico, the word came to me in Potsdam just exactly what had happened. 2 pages on legal type paper, and it was a long, weepy proposition. And I showed it to the members of the cabinet that were there, and I said, now, we're in a shape to win the war with very few casualties on our side, and we hope not.
Many of us living today had to live through a period of abject horror and fear that the world would end in a giant fireball of nuclear annihilation. There is a powerful term to describe what could be the end result of a rivalry between two nations armed with nuclear stockpiles: mutually assured destruction. What often gets lost in the shuffle of these conversations about Cold War hysteria over nukes is that only one nation has ever used nuclear weapons in wartime. It is arguable to say that the United States is the greatest nuclear threat of all time. Who else has actually used them on civilians or in wartime? It makes sense that an argument like that would get buried, though, in both academic spaces and pop culture, because the traditionalist view of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that they were a necessary evil to prevent the deaths of countless legions of American soldiers on the Japanese mainland. It's still common to find history buffs and military officials who will tell you that the bombings were a vital operation to keep our military from devastating losses and to end the war decisively. Historians who have opposed the viewpoint that the bombs were necessary sometimes refer to it as the patriotic orthodoxy.
I don't want to bypass Hiroshima.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, because it is still one of the great myths in American culture that we saved lives by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we did not. And I've done a lot of research on that. And the most elaborate research job on that, done by Gar Alperovitz and a crew of scholars, makes it clear we did not save lives. Japanese were about to surrender. We killed several 100,000 people unnecessarily.
Essentially, a narrative meant to keep the United States from being scrutinized for these actions. Since the moment the first bomb dropped, controversy has roiled over Truman's decision and thought process here. Eisenhower himself famously had misgivings about these bombings.
During his recitation of the relevant facts, I had been conscious of a feeling of depression, and so I voiced to him my grave misgivings. First, on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated, and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. And secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives.
But the United States Diplomatic Corps overall has treated the topic on an international level in pretty much the same way as your grandpa or grandma may have, either with complete indifference, lauded as an act of courage, or seen as some sort of population control. Of course, the United States never voluntarily came forward to apologize or admit any fault in conducting these attacks, and instead doubled down on their necessity.
Because I think that it's important to recognize that in the midst of war, leaders make all kinds of decisions. It's the job of historians to ask questions and examine them.
During World War II, the U.S. launched 2 atomic strikes on Japan's Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More than 210,000 people were killed in the bombings. Japan surrendered within days on August 15, 1945. A Pew Research Center poll found over half of Americans believed the nuclear strikes were justified.
For its part, the United Nations has never condemned, censured, or otherwise officially commented about the U.S. direct involvement in the bombings. One of the official goals of international diplomacy in this world order is non-proliferation, and various resolutions on the floor of the UN have pointed to the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a solemn reminder of what we must do to stop the threat of nuclear weapons. Again, none of those resolutions have directly condemned the bombings or the U.S. involvement itself. The UN began its history with speeches about the perils and promises of atomic energy, not any reckoning with what the United States did just 2 years before. The most common refrain among Zionists is that Hezbollah, the Qassam brigades of Hamas, the Houthis, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard do not follow the rules of engagement and desire the total destruction of Israel. Therefore, they and any citizens who might be near them have become targets who may be eliminated by any means. It might make sense to you to think of rules of engagement as a tit-for-tat situation. If the person who is attacking me is using rockets, am I unable to respond with rockets in kind? What I do feel, a feeling I share with most other human beings, I hope, is that killing innocent civilians with rockets, and especially women and children, is bad. At any rate, it seems that the IDF is totally comfortable with using this tactic in the course of ostensibly finding and killing combatants on the side of Hamas and Hezbollah.
After another day and night of strikes raining down on Gaza, volunteer crews perform the daily desperate search for people under the rubble.
Every day we see the same thing. Children under 2 or 3 years old, some babies 1 or 2 months old, women in their 60s, people over 50. So where are the fighters they are targeting? These are safe houses where babies are kept who haven't even lived yet.
I'm not here to try and decide what the rules of engagement are or to prescribe who is following them more often, but what I think is fundamentally wrong is that Israel has not been held accountable in any meaningful way, and yet they continue to indiscriminately bomb civilians. In part, to justify these actions, they claim that Hamas uses human shields. In reality, the Hamas government and military are close together because hospitals and schools are state-run. It's very easy to claim that a teacher or a nurse who's working for the government is also part of Hamas. So even if soldiers aren't there, they could just make this claim and no one would have to scrutinize it. It almost removes Israeli officials' responsibility. They think we have to bomb these targets because Hamas has put them in harm's way by being near them. Israel does not engage in creating civilian casualties because they want to. They say it's because they need to.
But you tell me, what do we need to do when Hamas terrorists are hiding behind human people, are hiding behind schools?
It's an unfortunate thing that they blame on Hamas. Therefore, their actions cannot be examined critically because they made a difficult moral choice to save their people. It is therefore difficult for some Israeli citizens to even have empathy for the children of their enemies because those children dying is baked into the enterprise itself. It's something that, as I said before, they blame on Hamas.
סיוע הזה לילדי עזה, אני אומר לך יותר מזה. כל ילד, כל תינוק בעזה הוא אויב. האויב הוא לא החמאס, והוא גם לא הזרוע הצבאית של החמאס, כמו שהפצ"רית שלנו מספרת לנו שאסור לנו לפגוע בחמאסניק, אלא אם כן הוא חלק מהזרוע הצבאית. כל ילד בעזה הוא האויב. יש לנו מלחמה בישות העזתית, ישות הטרור העזתית שבמו ידינו הקמנו בעזה, באוסלו ובהתנתקות. ההתנתקות שראש הממשלה נתניהו הצביע בעדה.
כן. טוב.
זה האויב. זה האויב. עכשיו, כל ילד כזה, שאתה עכשיו מגיש לו חלב, עוד 15 שנה יאנוס את בנותיך וישחט את ילדיך. אנחנו צריכים לכבוש את עזה וליישבה, ושלא יישאר שם ילד עזתי אחד. אין ניצחון אחר.
In any case, at least one international body, the ICC, has charged both Netanyahu and the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah with crimes against humanity. All of these people have escaped any culpability for the time being. Netanyahu is still free to travel to most of his allies' states without being arrested, especially since a lot of these allied states don't adhere to the International Criminal Court, but whatever. And the leader of Hamas and Hezbollah is, I don't know, what's going on with them. Now, as the conflict nears the 2-year mark, both Israel and its strongest ally have been looking at how to solve the humanitarian crisis they helped to create. On the Iranian war front, the central motivating force for Israel to bomb Iran is that Iran is constantly on the verge of having a nuclear weapon, according to Netanyahu.
You've probably heard this line before.
Iran has never given up its quest for nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them.
That's because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying this for more than 30 years. claiming Iran is close to having
nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Atomic bombs.
The language of non-proliferation is brought to bear on Iran. A nuclear-armed Ayatollah with his myriad of proxy soldiers is portrayed as the most dangerous outcome to be avoided at all cost. So naturally, two nuclear-armed powers decided they must preemptively attack to prevent this. At least, this is what we are told. Let's set aside for a moment that no one really knows whether or not Iran is ready to produce nuclear weapons. What we do know is that the United States and Israel both have their own stockpiles, and that nuclear-armed powers tend to not attack other nuclear-armed powers, at least directly.
Tensions between India and Pakistan continue to rise as the two nuclear powers exchange heavy artillery fire for a second day. Pakistani officials say more than 30 have been killed in multiple strikes launched by India yesterday. Retaliation, they say, for a militant attack on tourists, which India blames on Pakistan.
What we also know is that an important shipping lane called the Strait of Hormuz is adjacent to much of Iran's coast. Also, Iran has a lot of oil, and the U.S. has already couped them once and installed a dictator there. There's kind of a history there. It's not exactly a surprise that after 40 years of not developing nuclear weapons, that Iran is now seriously considering doing so. After the failure of the so-called Operation Midnight Hammer to decisively squash Iranian enrichment facilities, it's all but assured now that Iran will move further away from the regulations of the International Atomic Energy Agency toward a more clandestine operation.
If Iran needed an excuse, last month's US attacks on its nuclear facilities certainly gave it one. It's formally stopped cooperating with the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog. The move announced on state television, with Iran having accused IAEA head Rafael Grossi of siding with the West.
The response from the UN seems to be barely anything. Many other nations, including US enemies, have rushed to condemn the actions taken, but no formal resolutions have been taken up. People are alarmed, but institutions are not taking action. What was the goal of Israel and the United States here? Did they actually achieve anything? Is the world actually safer for these actions?
Today is an historic day.
That was when Iran agreed to a landmark deal with major powers to limit its nuclear program and allow thorough access to IAEA inspectors. The IAEA inspections were vital in keeping an eye on Iran's nuclear activities and stopping it from enriching uranium to levels that could be used for a nuclear weapon. The deal, though, unraveled in 2018 when Donald Trump withdrew US support and reimposed sanctions on Tehran.
US officials may never say it out loud, but it has always been in their strategic interest to control shipping lanes and to suppress anti-American sentiment across the globe. I really don't think there's any grand conspiracy afoot here. The US and its allies won World War II. Together, they formed the United Nations with the cooperation of many smaller, less influential, less powerful nations. The victors got the spoils, and to decide how they would stop World War III before it happened. Who is going to challenge the leadership in this body of the hegemon that just vaporized 200,000 souls from existence in a matter of seconds? Just like Israel's moral stance on its enemies, the US did not want to drop the atom bomb on them. It was the evilness and resilience of the Japanese officer corps and the civilian population at large that we used to justify these bombings. Moreover, no one could agree on the international stage about what the rules of engagement for aerial bombardment would be, let alone this new nuclear threat. Cities and civilians were already the targets of massive incendiary bombing campaigns. Just look at cities like Dresden that got wiped off the map. Scrutiny of the United States' actions at that time may have unleashed a cascade of new accusations at multiple countries. You know, Japan and China still have a lot that they might need to apologize for in the eyes of some civilians. And predictably, nations like China and France and the Soviet Union opted to develop their own nuclear weapons, rather than wait for this new area of warfare to be litigated.
And critics argue that by not apologizing, Obama will allow Japan to maintain its stance as a victim.
The United States is now just one of many great powers. We are entering a new era of an asymmetrical, multipolar world order. That means some nations are once again building spheres of influence, and more nations are vying for ever-increasing power on the world stage. The basis for a cooperative, rules-based international order is crumbling. If no one cares about rules, why did we ever make any rules in the first place? The UN was in part formed to say never again to the horrors of the Holocaust. Still, many events fitting our definitions of genocide have happened since then, but not all of them have been dealt with meaningfully by the UN. But keep in mind that the main funder and largest initial founder of this body in terms of influence was the United States. This nation sits atop a moral pedestal meant to shield it from reckoning with its own atrocities and moral failings. The United States plays a critical role in thwarting any examination of its own foreign policy in the UN or of its most important allies. Allies like Israel, who play a large role in maintaining the US strategic influence in the Middle East, have a vested interest in this status quo. With both Israel and the US largely shielded by themselves from accountability within the UN body, the US has historically been able to treat most of the globe as its own sphere of influence. I'm not offering specific solutions here. I know we're all just regular people and we don't really have much to go off of here, but the world we live in is not the one sold to us in textbooks. I need to add the caveat that yes, of course, the UN should still exist. There are people who won't starve today because the UN exists. There are people who did not die of smallpox who are still here with us today because of the UN and an unprecedented level of cooperation between the US and the USSR to end that disease for good. And of course, there are genocides that were thwarted by the interventions of the UN. But I also came of age during the events of 9/11, and I saw my country violate the sovereignty of two nations, only one of which had any tangential connection to the terrorists who were actually responsible for this heinous attack. At the age of 13, this was my first time experiencing the incongruence of international cooperation and the narrow interests of one nation state. If the UN was built to create a favorable environment for diplomacy, how was its largest funder allowed to occupy two sovereign nation states in the name of keeping the world safe for democracy? The answer is Occam's razor simple in my mind. You cannot have a fair and balanced international rules-based order while some nation states have more influence internationally than all others. As long as the United States can stand up and veto any resolution recognizing a genocide in Palestine or the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and statehood, we cannot be reasonably assured that the UN is fulfilling its intended mission or that human rights will be defended. As we move forward, more nations will feel emboldened to use violence to achieve their objectives. The list of countries that possess nuclear weapons will grow, and belligerence will just be one consequence. I want to take this a step further than just declaring the UN a mostly failed project. The notion of nuclear deterrence itself is crumbling. We have seen at least 3 major world powers make what appeared to be nuclear threats.
Мы считаем для себя возможным использовать все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Почему-то на Западе считают, что Россия никогда этого не использует. У нас же есть ядерная доктрина. Посмотрите, что там написано. Если чьи-то действия будут угрожать нашему суверенитету и территориальной целостности, мы считаем для себя возможным использовать все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства.
The fact of the matter is the Palestinian cause is an evil one.
Yeah, and Congressman, there is a ceasefire deal on the table right now that the White House is hoping both Israel and Hamas will sign on to. Does this shooting change anything when it comes to the course of the war or the negotiations to end it?
Well, I think it speaks to the importance of the only end of the conflict is complete and total surrender by those who support Muslim terror. In World War II, we did not negotiate a surrender with the Nazis. We did not negotiate a surrender with the Japanese. We nuked the Japanese twice in order to get unconditional surrender. That needs to be the same here. There is something deeply, deeply wrong with this culture, and it needs to be defeated.
Including one direct threat between 2 nuclear-armed powers.
आप हमारा पानी बंद करेंगे, हम आपका सांस बंद कर देंगे। मैं एक वफाकी वजीर की हैसियत से कहता हूं और एक जिम्मेदार की हैसियत से कहता हूं, ये चौकों में सजाने के लिए नहीं हमने रखे हुए, ये हमने हिंदुस्तान के लिए रखे हैं। बाबा, वेपन है वो हमने सिर्फ मॉडल बनाने के लिए नहीं रखे हुए, किस हिस्से में रखे हुए हैं। ये जो बैलिस्टिक मिसाइल हैं, ये हमारे बिल्कुल आप पाकिस्तान की हदूद को क्रॉस करोगे, अगर सोचोगे भी तो उसका खमियाजा आपको भुगतना पड़ेगा।
I think we can safely say that having nuclear weapons may be emboldening certain world powers to take actions they otherwise would not have. Let's not forget that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine decided to give up its nuclear stockpile. In the short term, this was viewed as a smart choice among an administrative collapse and the shock doctrine restructuring of these socialist republics. No one wanted Ukraine's nuclear weapons falling into the hands of a non-state actor just because the state itself fell apart. In the 21st century, hindsight shows those decisions may have been grave errors. Ukraine would likely not have been attacked by Russia in the last 15 years had Ukraine maintained its nuclear weapons arsenal. So long as the United States and Israel are allowed to maintain absolute moral authority over world affairs while shunning any examination of their own behavior on that stage, the UN cannot effectively advance the cause of self-determination, address non-proliferation, or defend human rights. Americans are given permission to forgive their country for the necessary evil of dropping atomic bombs on innocent civilians, for endless wars with endless occupations, and for the CIA to change the scape of politics across the globe, all by claiming it is for a safer, more democratic world. Israelis are given permission to forgive their country for a supposedly necessary evil of bombing hospitals, schools, and apartment blocks in the name of protecting all Jewish people. Ironically, it has been countries like Iran which have displayed the most willingness to adhere to international law. Certainly, Iran has funded proxy groups that operate as non-state actors, but all of these operatives have proved that their capabilities pale in comparison with Israel's. There is no way for Iran and its proxies to sustain any long-term incursions against Israel. Hezbollah and groups like it have almost completely abandoned individual terrorism in favor of launching rockets unsuccessfully at Israeli targets. The Iron Dome has proven effective at preventing any kind of widespread damage like that seen in Gaza, Syria, and Iran by the same forces and methods from Israel. Israel will continue to violate norms at the same time as demonstrating an incredible power imbalance with its enemies.
Israel sold this device to Hezbollah. Hezbollah paid for this weapon that was to be used against them.
They got a good price. They didn't know that they were buying it from Israel.
Who did they buy it from, or think they were buying it from?
We have an incredible array of possibilities of creating foreign companies that have no way being traced back to Israel. They didn't know that they were buying it from Israel.
Who did they buy it from, or think they were buying it from?
We have an incredible array of possibilities of creating foreign companies that have no way being traced back to Israel. Shell companies over shell companies who affect the supply chain to our favor. We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors, we're the producers, we're the main actors. The world is our stage.
Did you completely destroy and crush Hezbollah?
I think it's a big question, and I think the honest answer will be no. But I think after this tipping point of the beeper operation and the walkie-talkie and then IDF attack, put Hezbollah in a very, very difficult situation. No chain of command, no spirit in their soldiers, asking, begging for a ceasefire.
So you restore your sense of superiority, but what about your moral reputation? Don't you think Israel has to worry about its reputation?
Definitely, but there is a prioritization. First, you have to defend your people not being killed by the thousands. And then, the reputation.
They're completely isolated now.
In terms of the kind of warfare that was conducted with the walkie-talkies and the pagers, would you call it a psychological war?
The day after the pagers exploded, people were afraid to turn on the air conditioners in Lebanon because they were afraid that they would explode.
Iran's axis of resistance will never have symmetric capabilities, and so will always resort to tactics which Israel can quite justifiably describe as outside the norms of war, and in turn, allow them to go outside of the norms of war. This dialectic will continue to cascade and further erode the existing international institutions and norms. Combined with the growing US sanctions regime, this breakdown in our collective understanding of international security will polarize nations into different alliances and blocs. Rather than bringing nations nations into the U.S. orbit and its security arrangements, U.S. behavior toward the rest of the world and the UN has pushed the developing world even further away. This will only serve to fuel right-wing hawkish sentiment in the U.S. and Israel, increasing the aforementioned odious belligerent behavior from the same people who are ostensibly supposed to be the watchmen of the world. This is a vicious cycle that will only end in barbarism. The worst example is already unfolding before our eyes. After destroying what little was left of humanitarian aid in Gaza, the U.S. under Donald Trump has deployed mercenaries to manage aid. Starving people looking for food are met with bullets, and they have to get packaged goods that need to be prepared with heat and water, two things that are scarce as well. The situation is now completely beyond the control of the UN and the international community. So what does this mean for working class people like you and me? Most of all, we need solidarity and community to weather this storm. The world's problems are too great to shun our collective humanity, and we need all the help we can get to see the humanity on the other side. If you've stuck with me so far, I'm hoping you are already working toward the goal of rebuilding the meat space left. Watching YouTube and me making this YouTube video is not going to start a revolution. In any case, get together with like-minded people in your community and plan actions to call attention to the atrocities committed in your name. Second, find a way to be more assertive about your beliefs. It's easy to be hung up on the intransigence of people who just don't care about politics, but a lot of people can be convinced to change and can be moved to action by new ideas. Focus on those around you who are on the verge of understanding. Lose any fixations you have on challenging or rebutting the right wing to their face. There's no way to convince them. They're too far gone. Remind the people in your periphery that they have more in common with the ordinary people caught between the weapons of war than they do with the ruling class of their own country. More than ever, we need to reach folks who may not put news and information like this at the center of their daily routines. We must build a movement independent of the two-party system, focused on the crises we face. An anti-war, anti-genocide movement that fights for non-proliferation, that acknowledges the link between climate change and the military-industrial complex, and that challenges the antiquated notion the world is black and white, on a razor's edge between good and evil at all times. There is no way to build a better world if the nations with most power can ignore the rules they help create. No one who abandons morality to justify certain ends should stake claim to absolute moral authority on the world stage. As long as we live in a world where self-determination and state sovereignty are weaponized to deny those same rights to others, we don't have a rules-based international order. We just have might makes right.
But I want to say something else about that, which goes not only to Hiroshima, but to bombing in general, I think. And I would ask people who say we had to do it in order to save lives. I would say, well, if it was in August 1945, and you knew that we could end the war with Japan more quickly, because that's what it was about, ending it more quickly, not ending it because we knew it would end and the Japanese were on their way to defeat, but ending it more quickly by dropping a bomb, would you be willing to kill 100,000 American children to end the war more quickly? Well, the answer to that is obvious. Nobody would say yes. But you're willing to kill 100,000 Japanese children in order to end the war more quickly? What does that mean? What does that say about the way we think about other people? What does that say about war? What does it say about our willingness to kill other people because their lives are not as important as ours? Okay, I know you didn't want to get into Hiroshima.
All right, that's all right. Because,
but I couldn't let that go because it's such an important myth in American culture.